Today on Making New Possible, I am really excited to host Sara Daleiden from Sara Daleiden Consulting and the MKE LAX project. Sara's a dear friend and has been a mentor peer of mine for the better part of the last 2 decades. She's a cultural strategist and a creative placemaker. We're going to talk about her theory around creative placemaking, how she got into it, as well as how she uses what we did together about a decade and a half ago to inform some of her work going forward, what it means to bridge cultural and physical infrastructure. Sara.
Hi, morning.
I'm so excited to have you on the program today.
Thank you for inviting me.
When I was thinking about wanting to have a podcast about making new possible, you were like number one on my list of people I wanted to have conversations with. I just think when I think about my own art, my own expression, my own like creative rebellion, I think of you as like a mentor peer. I know there have been moments in time when we deeply collaborate, and there are other times when we sort of cheer each other on from afar. But when thinking about like, okay, who are the guests that would come on this podcast, you were like number one on the list. So I'm very excited to have you here and to start hopefully multiple conversations with you.
Thank you. That's a real tribute. Yeah, and I appreciate that you're taking the time to ask some of these bigger picture and motivation questions along the way, because it's easy to be in production mode and not always make time for this. So thanks for making some space today.
Of course. Well, I thought this first conversation we could start with the concept of creative placemaking, because that's really where our initial collaboration began. Maybe we could just start with like your own definition of it. How do you think about creative placemaking? How do you think about it as relational rather than maybe decorative? And where do you see the difference maybe on the ground?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a loaded term, creative placemaking. And for me, at some level, I see it a lot from a moment of where two sectors, so two parts of our economy, but also two parts of our political landscape in the US specifically intersects, which is where the arts sector, which also can be considered the creative industry sector, intersects with community development, which can also include economic development and real estate development. In a simple way, I think it's where those two meet each other. And I always enjoyed there was original white paper put out by the National Endowment for the Arts when they were studying what phenomena they saw in the US, which was how, again, in kind of classic US entrepreneurial instinct to keep being relevant, in particular in a global world, they were fascinated by how there had been development, particularly in cities, where, again, this intersection happened that kind of were thinking about as creative placemaking. So, how we think about Nashville, for example, as the heart of country music, right? But you can think about a place, and it's actually a place that and has an economy devoted to country music and all the things that go with that, including the experience of listening to music. But it's also more than that. It's an identity. It's a sense of culture that's there. So I think the National Endowment for the Arts was many partners in private space that they have were thinking, as a government body, was thinking about, how do we understand that better? How do we feed that instinct as something that's like healthy and lucrative and fascinating in the U.S. context?
Yeah, stimulative. Yeah.
So I think anyway, that's part of where my understanding comes from, is that it's like, okay, well, how has place actually, again, been a way of actually understanding how culture develops, but it's literally at that intersection point again of where art experiences. But I always like to think about the artists, or again, other creative leaders that are on the ground producing, but they also then again affect their context when they do that. So they affect the experience of the street. They might affect what the built environment ends up looking like, whether you live there or you're visiting.
Or they might create a new market in some way. You know what I mean? That becomes generative.
Yeah. So I just think that when that wave came through, which for me, creative placemaking also was a lot about a funding wave that came through. For me, coming out of arts and culture and creative industry sector, it came through that but it also deeply affected, again, people who are working in community development, which for me, community development is a term we have to often describe and affecting the built environment. So real estate itself, but all the other things that can go through that, like street life. Community development often means when there's investment dollars, could often come through nonprofits, for example, that are there, maybe things the private market's not going to do on its own, right? So private
Oh, I
market
see that. Yeah, it has to have sort of like a inception point. It has to be cultivated because private market's not interested. Yeah, or in early days. Yeah,
perhaps, right? I mean, that's the rationale I think that built that sector,
sure.
right? That yeah, so private market's not going to think about community in the same way. We could debate whether that's true, but that's a lot of how some of the nonprofits that have developed that work on literally making properties happen,
Mm-hmm.
but also again supporting businesses and other things that go with that that we can again group in that category of community development. So
Right.
yeah, if you think about the intersection, just you think about feeding that intersection,
Mm-hmm.
that's where creative placemaking lives to me. And I think it has evolved, and there's all these really beautiful, complicated conversations happening around it and practices happening. I'll just give you one other point of reference. I am part of a book that was published recently called Co-Creative Placekeeping. That's meant as
Keeping.
yeah, it's meant as a response that a lot of the investment that went into creative placemaking wasn't always understanding, and some people feel it wasn't respecting that there actually
Mm,
places existed already. We weren't like all of a sudden just making a place. There was always people there. There was always creative activities happening. It's just like whether you're enhancing it, affecting it. So again, just deep questions we have going in the U.S. right now, right?
mm,
Yeah.
that's curious. I think we've both played in the aftermath of a space becoming a place. And for me, I like to think about it as like a way to create civic infrastructure or a way for citizens to access their civic life in a new way. I'm curious for you, how do you think about that now? How has that changed for you over time?
I mean, I love the word civic, of the city. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a way to understand that word. City to me, again, at some level means all the things,
Mm-hmm.
like how humans construct life for themselves, including government. But again, I feel like when we're talking about the civic, we really it means any context. It doesn't just have to be urban, even though you and I tend to work a lot in urban context. Yeah, for me, the civic in this conversation, I mean, I just feel like for me, I still have as a core goal that I'm building experiences. And for me, it's often about streets or public spaces or other kinds of gathering places, whether it's public or private, and making spaces for neighbors to intersect with each other
Mm-hmm.
and really feel being neighbors, meaning there's a proximity, there's a bond, there's shared resources.
Mm-hmm.
There could be
Mm-hmm.
more sharing of resources, right? And like neighbor, I think for me, it does mean quite literally like who's right around me, right? That
Right.
I can align with. But neighbor, I also think has concentric circles to it, right? It can go
Mm-hmm.
much broader. Like I might even think about my regional neighbors, for example, not
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
people who are like on my block. But yeah, I feel like I'm always trying to think about civic activity to the end game of neighbors being more connected and all the things that can follow, like even organizing politically together or organizing again something that's going to affect how the built environment they're living in looks and feels over time.
I've been having this sort of mental tangent the last couple of days around the need for all of this because we're in this sort of like tail end experiment of individualism and because like collectively, particularly for like elder millennials and maybe like younger Gen Z, like we lost the construct of like faith-based communities being the central core of how people like feel community. And like the decline of that at the same time that like all of these other things you're talking about, even the like funding that spawned, you know what I mean, like 15 or 20 years ago to try to do this type of cultivation was because there was not the other infrastructure that existed culturally. I guess I'm wondering, like, can you maybe point to a moment when you decided to focus on this sort of cultural infrastructure rather than just be an artist or a consultant? I know technically Sara Daleiden Consulting is like your business, and I know you do identify as a, you know, a strategist, but I do think of you as sort of like really particularly working in this sort of like way of creating these platforms, and like I think of it as like new neural networks for how people interact with one another. kind of spawned this for you?
I just want to say, I think that's a profound understanding of our generational moment. And of course, then I would still argue what it feels like to live and work in a place is directly affected by what you just said.
Oh, no, I agree. I mean, I was thinking about it in my own context. Like, are we all hungry for that sort of like core, like, why am I here? What is this about? And we find it in the reunioning of like gatherings, which often like are, the fly to honey there is like, oh, there's music performance or there is some sort of like art-based thing that like draws you in. But what we're really like attracted to is that reverberation of being around other people because we don't have many social constructs that naturally force. And we don't even have. I was in New York yesterday morning, and at 6:30 in the morning, I was like, oh, I'm just going to walk down and go down to Battery Park and look out at the Statue of Liberty and then Uber to the airport. And at 6:30 in the morning, there were more pedestrians than at like any point the rest of the day I was in Bayview walking around. You know what I mean? Like, and feeling like, wow, there's just the lack of pedestrian culture here is also like contributes to my own sense of like loneliness, you know what I mean? And probably a big part of an internal motivator to like continually like craft gatherings because people don't naturally gather here. We don't have plazas or the means to do that in our physical infrastructure.
Yeah, and you're catching me actually at an interesting moment in my own development and reflection to relate to your question. I just would like to add one other layer to it, which to me, it's definitely faith-based communities, but linked again into a U.S. context that has a deep and complicated expression of migration and immigration to it. That it formed this government that still is such a young government that's trying to find its foot. Well, it's also an entrepreneurial government. And, so I just want to bring in, like, there's also a whole part of that point you're making that has to do with the government and the context of the U.S. as a political experiment. To me, this again is me talking as a young Gen Xer and being at this middle life moment. I'm just really deep in processing that both my parents have died and I've been doing in recent years, and I'm working through looking at some of my immigration ancestry has just been one of the responses for me as someone who comes from, I kind of have like multi-ethnic, multi-geography, European American immigration, but most of it that came both in my bloodlines came through around middle 1850s, right? To the Midwest, upper Midwest specifically, and stayed there. So I'm unusual because I have been so migratory as an adult, particularly, including migrating myself to Los Angeles and now being in this back and forth that I am with Milwaukee and Los Angeles. So I just want to say, like, that's a moment I'm in, and some of the things I'm thinking about because of that is, yeah, that I got into, at some level you could call this my work, but it's always really important to understand it, for me at least, to understand it, that it's still the framework of cultural production. Like, I am still making actions myself, and I also spend a lot of time encouraging actions in others, as I have with you as a mentor peer, that I'm still trying to world build, believe that another culture can emerge right now. And it comes from intersecting and hybridizing existing cultures. I don't think culture comes out of nothing. It literally is like a material that grows out of something else, just like nature mutates all the time. That's how I perceive it. So this is still cultural production desires that I have. And I will say it's partly because of my direct pathway, again, as a multi-generational US European American immigrant, but also I specifically came out of a very tight-knit Catholic community my whole childhood, again in the region of Milwaukee, the surrounds. From, again, deep in the immigration pattern was that Catholic framework. And yeah, for me, there's a whole conversation about why by the time I'm going into my adulthood and realizing that framework really didn't serve me a lot, particularly as someone who identified as female and feminist, that I've spent a long journey that for me now has been several decades of time and practice where arts and culture was a toolbox for me to, again, like, open up understanding my own identity and what I could do, but also my way of relating out with the world, and discovered basically along the way I had these skills for what I just generally call facilitation. I can produce group experiences, design them, then literally lead the group to create moments of conversation and I think curiosity among people. that then
Mm-hmm.
allows for that hybridization of culture to happen, meaning literally people can have different cultural perspectives and start to exchange, like start to
Mm,
understand differences can actually be generative as well as
right.
become something shared. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
just giving you like the conceptual framework for it, but really it's been that walk for me that led me into that. Plus, I just still have a love of land and sense of place. Like I feel grounded when I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, partly because I was born and raised in that region, right? And the seasons themselves are deeply familiar to me and comforting to me, but that also it's this like handlebar for me is like where I'm standing at any given moment. So again, it can be on a block in the city of Milwaukee. There's still other people standing there with me or walking with me. And so that it's that curiosity always that has driven me to like incubate from when I'm going to go make a street experience, like things we've done on West Wisconsin Avenue together over the years.
Tell me though, what was the like turning point from you? When did you first start this? Or do you think you've always done it forever and ever?
When did I start this kind of making?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there kind of feels like there's a few genesis points that I don't see in a linear way, that
Okay.
they've had different threads that were going and they've kind of aggregated to make me stronger. I'm able to produce in time.
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of point to just to pick one of those threads. It's funny because I spent time a lot in small town culture, and I still have
Okay.
a family in small town culture in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin and Minnesota specifically, but also then was really attached to cities like Milwaukee, but also Chicago. But the point is when I was growing up in small town culture, and specifically because I had families that came out of owning and running farms, this like sense of public space didn't exist in the same way for me, right? Like even I remember when I used to walk to school, I would walk on sidewalks, but I would also walk through people's yards all the time. You know what I mean? For me, it was just land and I could move through it to get
Sure.
from my house to the school. And I still feel like sometimes I have that concept, which is just, land is always interconnected. It's humans that construct like, oh, this is the public space. This is private, it's owned by this person, or however that happens. So yeah, I think that it was a slow reveal process for me when I, again, as an adult, chose to work and educate myself in cities, partly because I was like so curious about art and architecture and things that I would just call cultural production that was different than what I had been raised around. And I saw how expressive it was, and I was curious about what culture even is. But I realized that I had to learn public space. I had to learn that there were these boundaries. Because again, like my child mind was just wandering in landscaping, getting to know the people around me. So, example of that to me was, so I had gone to University of Notre Dame in Indiana, so a few hours drive from where I grew up, undergraduate college, and studied sculpture. And when I got out, there's a few different motivators in my personal life that got me out to Washington, D.C., and I was living on Capitol Hill. So it's kind of like my first time when I had like chosen to go to a really different place and been, again, in a very urban context. I remember feeling so excited because I was going to learn to ride trains. I was just like always curious about life without a car or without just being on my feet, right? And but Capitol Hill, so living near the U.S. federal Capitol and all those amazing resources, like the mall itself, all the Smithsonian uh, museums. But for me, again, because I'm a walker, I just would spend, night after night walking, when I was done with whatever I was doing during the day for work, going to the memorials, like the monuments and so many different kinds of parks. And I sometimes just think about that as an incubation space for me where I like got trained in the concept of public space because I didn't have it. And then now it's like there's this grandeur to that.
Right.
But it's also there was something so that seeped into me of understanding we share this. We share
Mm-hmm.
this. These are our memories. And again, for me, coming out of sculpture and spatial practice as an artist, to just be at something like the Lincoln Memorial or the Vietnam War Memorial, and just realize again choices that artists and designers had made to create that kind of feeling of space.
Right. The
Yeah,
sensation of it. Yeah.
since it's very sensory to me,
Mm-hmm.
sensual. But the point is, and just be clear, the memorials are open 24/7. I still think about them as a reference point. I want more of that kind of space everywhere. So back to like when we talk about the Civic or we talk about why gathering not just gathering events and experiences, but the space is important to construct spaces that are really open. And I think even in retrospect, how much those are spaces for grieving, for example, and grief happens 24/7. It's not something you can just put into yeah, you can always schedule it, right?
Right.
But I just feel like there's something so healthy. And again, being in the Capitol Hill, it's the root of something in the experiment of US government
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
make spaces like that. But yeah, so for me, I think sometimes it's not always like I'm trying to go for that sense of spectacle, that a memorial might have on the Capitol Hill. But I am trying to think about maybe smaller ways across different neighborhoods. How do we just like ensure that those places that we share? And maybe these days, honestly, I care less whether it's literally public land or private land. I care more about the experience again occurring and figuring out where it can occur consistently, but also evolve. So
Hmm.
not get stuck in just one framework, the framework that motivates
Right, be
that.
permeable in that way. This is a really, yeah, thank you for sharing that because it was making me realize, I was trying to think for myself, like when did this sort of like change for me? And I was thinking it was alongside you with our early work on West Wisconsin Avenue. It was it was at several moments along the way. The first time really realizing that like I had a better sense of like what was public and private, but I had more reverence actually for public space. And I had this sense that like someone from on high had designated as such and that the like rules around it were unchanging. You know what I mean? And I think in some of the like early even like low fidelity activations that we did, finding out things like, well, you really can't wrap cellophane between two light poles because they're so poorly constructed that like a gust of wind could like take them both down. And that for me was like, what? Like I have been walking on sidewalks my entire life and at any point the street lights could just fall down. Like I had it in my mind that they were like infallible. You know what I mean? Like it was public space. And then, you know what I mean? And as a consequence, it was like unchangeable and also like impermeable that way. And I remember us working really diligently with DPW with those early activations and saying like, well, can we, there's no permit for this. Could we do this? And it was that Mike who, you know what I mean, would just sort of like put his hands on his face in his hands, like, oh my God, you guys, come on now with this, like one more request. But it was like Mike that could sign off on it. Like
Yep.
realizing that like the institution of the city, like came down to Mike writing on a piece of paper that it was okay. And that like we could just ask Mike and then we could do it. Do you know what I mean? And realizing that like nothing that is in the public space has to stay the same. Like you as a citizen can influence what's around you. And then, we had like jockeyed to do all that. And we had the first kind of like big installation up with the Moray Pavilion. And a couple weeks later, I was down just kind of walking through it. And I looked up and I saw this like, it looked like a surveillance camera. And I was like, God, did we put a camera on this? I don't remember us like putting a camera on it. And I looked a little closer and I realized it was like another artist had tagged it with this like fake camera. And I thought, oh God, look what we've done. We've turned a space into a place and then it's like a platform for other people to be like, this, it also needs this. You know what I mean? This extra little ornamental attachment that had nothing to do with our original design. You know what I mean? That someone else felt like compelled to add to it. That way, I think was like the big turning point for me. And now I feel like I see everything as possible. Like if it's public or private, like what's the path of least resistance to making it a place that people want to gather and
I
make their own? And then, I mean, I feel like all the rest of our work in the last, whatever, that was 15 years ago, has been like trying to reveal the agency that people have. We don't always work with municipalities. We work a lot with for-profit companies and even helping them to see like this little scrap of grass in front of your bank branch could be like a park that people want to go use and having that be like revelatory to them. Like, oh, people would want to use this scrap of grass. What would they want to use it for? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and to me, it's just still how alive I can feel and the place I am can feel to me when
Mm-hmm.
I get into that experience of agency. This is why for me, one of the things I just adore about you and your team at Milwaukee is your range. And to me, that's where you go, the way you've affected all different kinds of places already. And the way you think about, again, Milwaukee overall as a place, even when you're in like one corner of it, stimulating it, creating imagination in that place. But I also think you're so expressive of why it's important to have a range in the palette. Like that can be the scale of the event, the scale of the space, perhaps even just the number of people who's there. You're just always working on material to understand, like, I be responsive to the moment in that context. So some things are better in a small group, and then some things are large and multi-block, thousands of people long, right? Like,
Sure.
and time itself is part of that material too. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess, I just want to point out that the city of Milwaukee's DPW, Department of Public Works, is one of the great creative partners of my life. And I feel
Agreed.
like of our life, I often will bring them up when I'm even in other contexts in the US working, that it's a good example of your point of, yes, humanizing by finding the actual staff people to have a conversation with, but the creativity and openness and responsiveness I've experienced with that DPW is inspired me.
Right.
They're a pivot in my life for sure. That what's possible with a city government,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I just want to note that. And then I think the other point, something else that's beautiful what you're saying to me is I feel like you're expressing culture. And again, for me, as someone who's curious both about the culture I inherited and partly because I feel like I grew up again in a very concise culture in a lot of ways, and I went through a very
Sure.
big experience my adulthood to morph from that. It's like it's an abstract concept to get my head around, right? But for me, navigating the actual physical material of place, and again, that can include a concrete sidewalk, among any number of other things that exist in the built environment. That gives me a way of understanding how it's natural for humans, but a lot of other kinds of life with human life to naturally keep trying and changing, like this thing again that culture is always doing, which is it's really not a static experience, even though it can aggregate in time such that a group, for example, can have an ethnic identity and say, this is the language we speak, these are the foods we eat, these are the
This is how we
rituals we
dress. Yeah.
have. But yet it's always based in these very small moments of decision making, and I would argue change that's going on all the time. So for me, learning how to have a sense of agency with myself, or again supporting another leader like you to grow that understanding, and the groups we work with gets into that experiential understanding of like, oh, I can actually produce culture, but it can be visible because of where I am and how where I am I can affect what happens there in time.
I'm just so grateful for you because I feel like maybe we or even myself like knew that instinctively. There was something very instinct. Yeah, it was just like an instinct we had, but I had no vocabulary for any of it prior to meeting you. And I feel like you gave me a framework of understanding um, that helps to shape the destiny of Milwaukee for sure, but also all of the places that we've worked as a consequence. Because it felt like a thing. I mean, I've told you this a million times. Like, I feel like I am a platform artist, and that's how like even the most um, classical marketing actions that we take that feel very transactional. I'm using it with that same frame over and over and over. And I'm really like so sincerely grateful to you for giving that to me. I have a question for you. I guess when's the last time you went to the Milwaukee night market, and what does it feel like to you now, knowing like where we originally started and how we argued with Mike about putting cellophane on light poles?
Can I just thank you for the acknowledgement first? And I would do want to
Yes.
answer your question. It's a deeply meaningful acknowledgement to me. And maybe again, if you ever want to really understand core of what I am and what I do, what you just said, like how I was able to help create space and provide relationship with you over time so you could build your own capacity to produce. I'm so proud of you, and I get to enjoy, yes, like I go to night market and I still get to enjoy part of what you and we produced. And it's those years going by, again, in a place. That's what I deeply value. But the point is this work or this way of leading can be so hard because it takes so much endurance and
Uh,
vision and again ability to relate over time, which
no, I agree.
I have my
Yeah,
imperfect.
there is an enduring quality to it.
Yeah. But so let's take night market. Yeah, I don't think I've missed a summer. I always go at least once. And honestly, the last handful of years for sure, for me, there's always a milestone moment to it where I get to just be a participant walking the night market. And for me, it's rich because I remember West Wisconsin Avenue in 2013 when we started concepting all this and how, you know, generalization was it's a financial district that cleared out at 5 p.m. There was not street life happening. People were
Mm,
not enjoying food or art experiences or other things very much on the street that is our main street, Wisconsin Avenue, but also, you know, in any number of shops around the retail, the restaurants, there was a lot of empty space, right? When we started, there was a moment when Wisconsin Avenue was something before even the city of Milwaukee existed. But the point is it had had many lives before we had helped it have this life, right? And
mm-hmm.
I always feel that sense of history when I go out there for a night market there was different definitions of downtown and Main Street that have existed on Wisconsin Avenue. But the point is something when we were starting, it was partly because I would argue that the culture of that street was going to a sense of vacancy and what could
Mm-hmm.
feel like decay and also could feel depressing, you know? So the point is we like took on that's the street itself a lot to me. It went through various machinations that led us to be like, let's try a night market. And even the fact I think that it's once a month in the warm months of the year and it's just stayed consistent that way now for over a decade. Like for me, it's again, you could argue part of what got produced was rhythm. So I helped you concept and kickstart it. But you and now even like the fact that you were able to pass it on to West Town as a local community development entity to keep it going, but keeping the rhythm intact to me is a big part of what it is, in addition
Mm,
to the experience of being a lot of local vendors, a few blocks that are closed off for the night. And still I really love how it's retained a lot of, again, the investment of local artists making experiences, True School being one of the main anchors of that. So I just think that I learned a lot when we made it about something again I had tried before, but I maybe hadn't in such a concentration as we did it in that first year of the night market, which was to invite artists from different neighborhoods around the city, invite them to produce a new work and pay them well to do it, but also invite them to bring their networks, which could be as simple as
right.
the artists have families, the artists have friends. But it was just kind of like again inviting the corners of Milwaukee's neighborhoods into the main street under this concept of like we share this main street. This is our city
It's all
center.
of ours.
Yeah. But again, that direct invitation to share something of cultural expression through the mechanism of a local artist, that came in a concentrated form of the night market for 4 hours. That plus, and I always think about the local vendors. I always give Courtney Heimerl a lot of credit
Mm,
for the capacity that she still has to produce um, markets that really celebrate, art and craft and other creative production going on locally to remix those vendors together, but also to support them how they set up their booths. I think Milwaukee has done a lot of this and keeps doing this right over the years. But again, it was that remixing that we were able to stimulate inside of the frame of a night market. And that's what's held true for me, even though I think I do think every year has had different nuances to that. And then when I went this year, it's been a couple months ago now. I'm not sure that I can even differentiate well exactly what I experienced, but I just remember this year again, still feeling how, that it's second to fourth. I felt so aware of how much real estate development had
I
happened with,
know.
the symphony, even all the build out going on the parking lot now, like realizing again that this social space of the night market has created rhythm, but then all this other stuff that we could call permanent or could call property also responded to that. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I felt this time was like, wow, it really did incubate or become like a web that created the opportunities, I believe, for all that other redevelopment to happen.
Yeah, I do too. I was really, particularly in June. June was maybe the most dense crowds we've ever seen this summer, and I was moved by that. In a like really deep way for all the reasons you just said, feeling like, wow, every version of this. I mean, when we first started, these were all abandoned buildings on the footprint. And then through the last, 12 years, there were moments there where all that construction was happening and we were like, okay, so we'll just like scoot the market like 20 feet this way. Well, like this whole facade of this building is under construction. You know what I mean? Like we just like cut to your point about rhythm. Like that's fine. We'll just make it skinnier and then we'll make it wider. And then, you know what I mean? We'll figure out how to like make it fit. Feeling like, wow, a lot has really changed, but also, there was so much, negativity around us in that first season. Active folks saying like, well, that would be an enormous waste of time. No one's going to come. You know what I mean? And feeling even still more vindicated. Like, people will come if you invite them, if you intentionally invite them to come. And I think you're right. I think the natural and intentional cross-pollination we did of groups that don't normally collaborate sort of changed the game. It changed the script. Like that was a place that no one wanted to be, and so that it could be everyone's place all over again. I'm really, really proud of that. And it's mesmerizing to me.
Yeah.
I mean, so mesmerizing.
And it's a legend to a map to me. So for me, I do want healthy neighborhoods and street experiences. Again, whether we call it urban or rural or some other kind of landscape in the US, I'm just very US focused, and I'm very focused on US as an international space internally. Actually, we have all these nations here, right? And I think about, this is still about affecting how neighborhoods look and feel over the long game, which includes architecture or includes street infrastructure, like big physical things are included. But yet, like Night Market and what the evolution of West Wisconsin Avenue, of which Night Market was just a key component to me. And I would argue a pace setter and a tone setter. Socially, it's just realizing to me still that we can work the physical, but it's always the social is always there. And again, sometimes the social or smaller, more nimble senses of a physical, like putting an installation up for a moment, right? It's a way of, again, testing and incubating and starting some change that's possible, like to feel that what might be in our imagination, to feel it by being present on that street. Like, this is what this could feel to relate this way with another human, but also with any structure that's around me, including light poles. So now when I go into a context that I want to affect, which might be my neighborhood where I'm living and working, or I get invited in, like I did in that context, even though I was attached to West Wisconsin Avenue, I was still being brought in again as an artist, consultant, culture worker. And now I just think about this palette that I have, and I can use something like Night Market and West Wisconsin Avenue as a reference point that, okay, what exactly is needed here? Is it something that exists for an hour physically, socially? Is it something that, again, can even be as large scale and abstract as like a neighborhood plan, like something that's 20 years in length and is a written document. But the point is it has a lot of imagination to it about how you get from what is to what could be.
Right.
It's all the same game to me now. It's just being precise, but still taking some chances, because you can't know exactly, right? We couldn't know with the Night Market. We just were making an educated guess that was worth trying. I do that all the time still.
Oh, I love that. Okay, well, I need to have you back on in short order, because now I want to talk about everything we're each doing in the Near West Side, but maybe that'll be part 2.
Okay.
Yeah. I really, really appreciate the intro to our series of conversations today, Sara. Thank you.
Yeah.